St. Pancras, Tuesday, the 19th of May, 1987. We're about to make a journey by HST along the Midland Main Line as far as Leicester. On the way, we'll explore the route using various sources of archive film, including a collection of film shot in the early 1970s before the electrification scheme south of Bedford, colour slides and stills from the 1930s to the present day, and material shot in the early 60s showing steam at work on the line north of Bedford. The Midland Railway was to enter London in grand style. St. Pancras was opened to passenger traffic on the 1st of October, 1868. This was one of the last large main line stations to enter the capital. When the Midland arrived, this part of London was already well developed. Today, the surrounding streets give a feel of the area before the coming of the railway. It was described in the 1850s as a dreary and unsavoury locality, abandoned to mountains of refuse and occupied by smoke-belching potteries and brick kilns. When the Midland came, it brought about a revolution. The station alone swept away 7 streets, totalling 3,000 houses. Within a few years, the area was dominated by one of London's great landmarks. Construction started in 1865. From the chaos of this vast site was to rise a structure which at the time represented one of the widest single spans in the world, measuring 240 feet and rising to a height of 100 feet. To reach this site, it was necessary for the railway to cross the Regent's Canal, and this involved raising the line 17 feet above the level of the Euston Road. Consequently, the station was built above the level of the surrounding area and supported by a total of 720 cast iron columns. The space created below the station floor was used to accommodate beer traffic from Burton-on-Trent until the 1950s. Of the station above, a contemporary once wrote, "There is nothing else in the world that will bear comparison with it. Constructed, it may be, from hundreds of tons of iron framing, and yet it looks so light and pretty from below that the first impression is that it cannot possibly bear the glass and slates with which it's been covered." It's hardly surprising that it was declared to be a veritable railway place, which is the most perfect in every possible respect in the world. The Midland Railway had most certainly reached the capital in grand style. The station has seen a wide variety of motive power in the intervening years. The main line expresses were, in later years, worked by Royal Scots and Jubilees, with Black 5s and 264 tanks on the stopping trains. The rather ineffective Stenier 262 tanks and some BR standards also appeared. 1962 marked the end of steam traction on passenger trains. From this date, the locals to Bedford were worked primarily by DMUs, while mainline trains were peak-hauled. These scenes were taken in 1972. The late 70s were to see further change with the advent of electrification. The signal box in the far distance would be swept away, while HSTs and electrics would replace the diesels. And it's with this new generation mainline power that we'll start our journey north along the Midland Line. We are now approaching the Regent's Canal, the location of which governed the height at which the station could be entered. Between 1898 and 1909, these approach lines were widened and improved considerably, providing the station and its approaches with extensive passenger and freight facilities. However, the complexity that resulted created a signal gantry with no fewer than 42 signal arms. To the far right are the lines coming from Moorgate and the Metropolitan. The suburban trains from the Midland were worked along these lines by Fowler 262 tanks, fitted with condensing apparatus to allow them to consume their own exhaust steam in the tunnels. The London clay through which the line passes was troublesome to the engineers of the 19th century. The pressure of the clay was resisted by massive retaining walls, and in the cuttings themselves with low arches and bridges spanning the line. Just north of the station stand the former Kentish Town locomotive sheds. The extensive roundhouse and works once provided motive power for the suburban services to Moorgate. Haverstock Hill Station, the remains of which can still be seen after closure way back in 1916. Just north of here, we're into Belsize Tunnel, 1¼ miles long and passing under Primrose Hill 100 feet above. Once through, the line becomes more open and passes under the London and North Western Line. West Hampstead is the nerve centre of the line since colour lights were introduced in the early 1980s. Here stands the panel box controlling the entire line from St Pancras to Sharnbrook in the north. 15 years ago, the station possessed a single humble box, one of dozens of manual boxes controlling the line between here and Bedford. Before the advent of electrification, the Midland Line was, in the early 1970s, largely unchanged since the days of the Midland Railway. Although steam had given way to diesel, the railway still maintained its Midland boxes and station buildings. In the 1880s, the Midland purchased 150 acres of land here at Cricklewood for the construction of a locomotive depot and marshalling yards to service their traffic bound for those lines connecting with other railway companies. Today, Cricklewood still maintains a large yard, situated to the left of this view. The steam shed closed in December 1964 and was situated to the far right. Today, the area houses an extensive electric depot. The line into St Pancras was originally built as double track. In the 1880s, the route was quadrupled to allow for the separation of freight and express traffic. Some sections were even extended to 6 tracks. The lines to the left handle freight, the central lines express traffic, and those to the right, local trains. Mill Hill Station. Just beyond, the tracks reduce from 6 to 4 at Silkstream Junction. Here, the freight lines are carried over the main lines to join the slow tracks. This section has been accompanied by the motorway since 1972. The HSTs on the Midland are limited to 100 miles per hour. There are 2 reasons for this. Firstly, a second man would be required in the driving cab for speeds above 100 miles per hour. And in view of the line limits on the Midland, this would be uneconomic, since most sections would be limited to 100 anyway. Now we're about to enter Elstree Tunnel. This marks the boundary between Middlesex and Hertfordshire. For us, it will also mark the boundary between now and pre-electrification times, for we will emerge from the tunnel in 1973 behind the same working, this time peak-hauled. At that time, the station and its approaches had remained little changed since the days of steam. These Derby 4-car units were introduced in 1959 to improve the existing steam-hauled non-corridor suburban trains. They were intended as a stopgap measure before the electrification of the line. In the event, they worked for a total of 22 years. Hydraulic transmissions made them prone to failure, and the depot at Cricklewood was hard pushed to keep the service to an acceptable standard. The British Railways Type 2s had a long history on the line. They were introduced in 1958 and worked parcels and secondary freight until 1986. Type 4 peaks dominated heavy freight and express workings since their introduction in 1958. From 1962, they worked nearly all the express duties. Their end finally came in May 1987, when the last 2 locomotive-hauled trains were replaced by HSTs. In the 1960s, the class carried an attractive green livery. In 1960, the legendary Blue Pullman was introduced on a daily service to and from Manchester. This was a rather crude predecessor to the HSTs, with a power car at each end. Elstree is located at the first summit of the line from St Pancras. From here it's downhill on grades of 1 in 200 towards Radlett. Once through the station, the line climbs into the Chiltern Hills on grades of 1 in 176. Knapsbury was once an intermediate box and controlled crossovers from the slow to main lines. In 1905, a station was constructed here to serve the local county asylum. The platform was situated between the up and down slow lines alongside the signal box. It was closed to passenger traffic in 1959. St Albans, and we've travelled 20 miles from London. This station once possessed a magnificent engine shed situated on the far side of the line. This obscure and little-known depot was closed in 1960 and demolished in 1968. 2 decades of growth have totally obscured the site of the shed. The Midland came late to the town. The Great Northern and the London and North Western had already opened branches from Hatfield and Watford to a terminus at St Albans Abbey. The Midland line arrived in 1868. The Hatfield branch closed to passenger traffic way back in 1951. Only a few remnants of this line survive, although the earthworks under the Midland are still clearly visible. And remarkably, the station here at London Road has survived, now hidden by years of undergrowth and its constant stream of traffic. The closure notice remains in place 36 years after the last passenger set foot on the station. Today, the Great Northern buildings play host to a remarkable collection of scrap military vehicles. There were once dozens of mechanical boxes on the line to Bedford. Only the south box at St Albans has survived, having had a preservation order placed on it in recent years. It was still open when these scenes were taken in 1976. The station buildings were once located to the far side of the line. They were demolished in the late 70s and replaced by a modern structure located in the former goods depot. Now we are passing through the station and continuing north along the Midland Main Line. Harpenden Station. Just north of here was situated the junction for the branch to Redbourne, known as the Nicky Line. The branch diverged to the left of this view. Passenger traffic ceased in 1947, although freight survived until 1982. The Midland was the main freight route into the capital from the north. In particular, vast quantities of coal were moved from the yards at Totton in heavy, loose-coupled freights. To power them, the LMS introduced these massive 2662 Bayer-Garrett locomotives, although in the late 50s, two 10-0s were introduced. The slow lines between Harpenden and Luton were once used as long holding loops. Here, freights would be parked ready for a path into the capital. Luton was an early candidate for modernization by the LMS, and the station buildings date from 1937. This was, and still is, the first stopping point for the expresses to and from the north. In the later days of steam, these expresses were worked mostly by Jubilees and Royal Scots. In Midland days, the compounds provided the main source of power, and remarkably, a few of the class remained in service until as late as 1957. Dieselization in the early 1960s did not significantly change the station itself. It still remained very much the same as in the days of the Midland Railway. The magnificent Midland Railway goods shed on the left was to become an early candidate for demolition. Once north of Luton, we passed through a series of outer suburban stations, Flitwick, Arlington and Leagrave, before arriving at Bedford. The railway here has a fascinating history. When the Midland arrived here in 1859 from the north, the line originally ran to Hitchin and reached London via the Great Northern Line to King's Cross. In 1868, the Midland built its own route into London St Pancras. However, the station of 1859 remained in use and survived intact until the mid-1970s. It was aligned to serve the old route to Hitchin, but was bypassed to one side by a new set of main line tracks seen to the far left of this view. The graceful cast-iron awnings and buildings were destined for demolition, and the site is now occupied by a discount warehouse and car park. "200 yards to the north stands a new and functional replacement aligned directly alongside the main line. Immediately north of the station, the character of the line changes dramatically. The wires and masts give way to a broad open main line. We are still on quadruple track and will remain on this as far as Kettering, making this one of the longest stretches of four-track in the country. The section north of Bedford is straight and level as it crosses and recrosses the River Ouse. However, soon we will start the climb to one of 5 summits situated between here and Leicester. The first is of considerable length and severity and starts near the station at Sharnbrook. In the next 4 miles, we will climb a total of 200 feet. When the Midland first arrived here in 1859, the company was short of money. So to reduce costs, tunnels were avoided and cuttings and embankments used wherever possible. The result was a climb that represented, in the days of steam, a severe obstacle to the efficient working of freight traffic. So, in the 1880s, a second line was built alongside the first. This deviation used a tunnel 1,840 yards long to reduce the climb by a total of 40 feet. Even with this deviation, many a freight train stalled as it struggled to cope with rails covered in leaves and rain. Today's freights are often lightly loaded, and little use is made of the new deviation. North of Bedford, the area is characterized by quiet villages and peaceful and unspoilt countryside. Just a few times each hour, the solitude is disturbed by an HST climbing towards the summit. Now we're over the summit and heading down grade towards Wellingborough. Thus far, the route has been signalled from one main panel box situated at West Hampstead. Now we'll leave this section and enter one under the control of manually worked signal boxes. These, distance, are controlled by the first box located at Wellingborough Station. This is now the only section of Main Line from London controlled by semaphores. The method of working has changed little for 50 years, although the signal arms have been replaced with upper quadrants. The box and lever frame date back to the turn of the century, a remarkable survivor in an age of high-speed trains and modern air-braked freights. Wellingborough once had a thriving steam locomotive depot. Such a substantial structure does not succumb easily to demolition. 25 years ago, these buildings reverberated to the sound of steam. The coming of the railway in the 1860s transformed the fortunes of Wellingborough. The run to London was, at 65 miles, a convenient day's work for a steam engine. Right up until the 60s, the depot supplied motive power for coal traffic bound for the yards at Cricklewood. This 9F is seen heading south from Wellingborough on just such a train. By the time these scenes were taken in 1963, the age of steam was drawing to a close. This grimy collection of motive power was soon to be displaced by peaks and brush-type floors. Steam-hauled expresses had long since given way to diesel power, although even at this late date there were still some steam-worked excursions in evidence. The depot here opened in 1872. For over 90 years it saw a considerable variety of locomotives, including the Garrett 2662s. Closure and replacement by a modern diesel depot took place in 1964. By the end of 1965, all steam working had finished. By 1987, even the diesel depot had closed, and Wellingborough's role as a railway centre was almost over. We are now heading north and passing by some of the few remaining manual boxes on the Midland Main Line. Kettering, with the exception of St Pancras, retains the best and most original Midland buildings on the line. Magnificent cast iron awnings have survived unaltered and reflect the importance of the town they serve. The town once generated considerable freight traffic, and alongside the station stood a busy steam shed. These scenes were taken in 1963. At that time, a considerable number of freight movements were in evidence, most hauled by a rather grimy combination of 9Fs, Stanier 8Fs, and WD 280s. The sight and sound of steam has long since faded into history. Only the station survives as a reminder of a very different past. Glendon South Junction, and the point where the line for Corby diverges to the northeast. We've travelled 75 miles from St Pancras. From here, it's double track as far as Leicester. The Midland was claimed by many to stand head and shoulders above its rivals. It boasted London's most impressive terminus. It carried some of the most comfortable and prestigious trains to the capital. But in the post-war years, the line began a steady decline, and by the 1960s, some sections were even threatened with closure. Since then, the route has been modernized, and today carries HSTs on schedules far faster than in the days of the Midland. Market Harbour Station characterizes the Midland Main Line of the 80s. Signalling and track have been modernized, but the freight traffic, junctions and holding yards have long since disappeared. Today, the high-speed trains pass along a line very different in character and purpose. Many of the slides used in this program have been supplied by Colour Rail. For a copy of their latest catalogue, send £2 to 5 Treacher's Close, Chesham, Bucks.